Thank you everyone for coming today. Today we're part of our Navigating China series, and we're looking at setting up an entity in the Chinese market. So thank you all for coming, and thank you for those who were joining remotely as well. So just very quick kind of overview of what we've got for you today. So I'm just going to do a bit of an introduction. My name's Chris Lethbridge. I look after member programs here at the China-Britain Business Council. I'm then going to hand over to Christina, who's going to talk a lot about the technical elements of actually setting up and what's involved in that kind of process. And then we've got Can, who's going to provide a case study of a company who's kind of gone through the process of entering the market, working through Launchpad, and then actually setting up their own entity in the Chinese market, and kind of some of the things that they thought about as part of that process. So very briefly, I mean, for many businesses, they kind of reach a point on their China journey when they need to kind of grow further, and that could be, for a few reasons. So sometimes, you're looking to kind of actually have staff on the ground in China. It could be that you need to kind of issue invoices to your Chinese partners. May want to open a bank account. You may want to have kind of a Chinese website. There's a whole bunch of reasons. You might be looking to manufacture in the Chinese market. And so there comes a point on your China journey where you have to make a choice about, setting up or not. CBBC can also help you a little bit on this process through a service that we call Launchpad. So I think it's worth kind of explaining what Launchpad is and isn't. So essentially, under Launchpad, we allow you to employ someone under our corporate structure. So what that means is you don't necessarily need to go through the setup process, but you can have the benefit of having someone on the ground in the Chinese market. Practically that means that you can't issue invoices yourself, but you can have someone in the country, doing business development on your behalf. The reason I'm mentioning this is that Christina's going to talk a lot about the detail, and for some companies that might put you off. But through Launchpad, you can kind of test it and see if it works for you. If China proves kind of a viable, worthwhile making that further investment, then you can kind of take those steps. So a good example of kind of how Launchpad can work for you is Charlotte Tilbury. So Charlotte Tilbury, well-known makeup brand, and they actually originally launched on e-commerce platform. And they were finding that trying to manage kind of their China operations from the UK was a bit of a challenge. They were working with, Alibaba and JD.com, so big Chinese tech platforms, and they really needed someone on the ground in the right time zone who kind of understood the cultural nuances to manage that relationship. So initially, they actually employed, I think it was 4 or so individuals under our Launchpad program based in Hangzhou, so the headquarters of Alibaba. And JD, and they were able to initially kind of work with those platforms and prove that setting up their own corporate entity was the right next step. And so then eventually they decided that actually, look, it was worthwhile making this next step, and they established their own legal entity, and then we actually moved those 4 team members from the Launchpad program into their corporate structure. So this is kind of a classic case study and an example of how Launchpad can work for some companies, and a good example of success, right, is actually graduating from Launchpad into your own corporate structure. And these are just some of the organizations and entities who have used Launchpad as a kind of entry method. So that is it from me. As I said, very short and brief, just introduction to one option. I'm going to hand over to Christina now, who's going to talk a bit about setting up in China. Let me just bring up the slides. There you go. Christina.
This one, right?
Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. Happy New Year. It's really nice to see a room filled with people I did my first event live with the CBBC in June. It was Consumer Day. So this is my second live event in, well, since November 2019, actually. So bear with me. I do most of my presentations on Zoom. Today, we're talking about setting up an entity in China. Chris said we've got about an hour and 15 minutes. So I do want to entertain you a little bit. Otherwise, the subject matter can be quite heavy. So I want to start off with, what are your goals for China? Right? There's no point in talking about the expansion into the Chinese market without first analyzing what your specific goals are for the Chinese market. So I'm providing you with a series of goals that I have. All right. My first one is to make money. I think anybody who wants to go into China wants to make money, right? And most of you are probably looking to sell into the Chinese market, and that's how you plan on making your money. Now, having said that, there may be some of you on here today who are not planning on selling into China, but are actually looking to manufacture in China, or are looking to strengthen the third-party logistics providers, manufacturers, suppliers, etc. And selling could be a long-term vision for you, okay? But in the end of the day, you're doing all of that either to save cost, right? And ultimately make more money. The next is you want to have people on the ground in China. Now, this is invaluable. And we've seen that in the last 3 years, okay? You want to be efficient in the Chinese market. You need somebody on the ground to support you. Now, by having people on the ground in China, I don't necessarily mean that these are employees. These can be third parties that are supporting your business in the Chinese market, meaning they are TPs, Tmall providers. They are logistics providers, distributors, licensees, franchisees, sales agents, whatever you want to call them. You are developing an ecosystem of individuals / companies that are there to support your business and develop it so you can make more money. All right. The next is being able to invoice locally and issue fapiaos. If you don't know what fapiaos are, this is a term you should learn. Fapiaos are the official invoices that are issued when you are selling in the Chinese market. And you may have clients requesting that you have the ability to issue fapiaos in your own company name. Okay, so this could very well be a trigger point for many of you to say, we now need to have an entity in China because we have clients who are requesting this. Now, you can utilize third parties to issue these fapiaos. For example, there are import-export agents on the ground who can just do this paperwork for you. But then the question is, how much control do you want to relinquish, right? Now, these are just 4 goals, okay? Some of you might have entirely new, different goals that you want to achieve, all right? If you want to share, if somebody is not willing to be shy, if you want to share what your goals are, voice up. If not, it's okay, I'll move on. No, nobody wants to share? Well, I want to lead on to then what your frustrations in the Chinese market might be. All right, now the first frustration is obviously border controls, which as of 2 days ago, no longer exist. Another frustration might be that COVID is now rampaging throughout the entire country, and all of your people within your ecosystem are down for the count with COVID. I know mine are. One just tested negative yesterday, thank God, but everybody else is at home sick with no medication because pharmacies are also not housing all the medication that's needed. But let me go back to the basics. I mean, these are my frustrations at the moment, but let me go back to the basics. For many of you, you might simply not know what options, what business models exist in China, right? What can you do? What can you not do? All right, and that's the whole point of today's presentation, is I'm going to be going through these options. Chris did mention that through the other sessions in the Navigating China series, they were also going through these business models. So I'll fly through it, but it's just to give you an overall picture as to what might trigger you to actually set up an entity in China. For me, this is a huge one, and probably the biggest downfall of most of the medium-sized to larger companies out there is that there's zero alignment amongst the board of directors or senior management on how to achieve the goals that you're looking to set. So if you've got a board of directors with 10 people, 2 might say, we've got to set up an entity, and 8 might say, no way, we're not making that investment. How do you convince those other 8 to get into alignment, right? Now, this is just one area where you might need alignment. And I have cases where people don't want to hold positions and roles in China, and hence then there's the blockage for setting up the entity, right? There could be so many other areas within setting up a company that can cause this zero alignment, and hence cause an obstacle that you can't bypass to get into China and actually set up your entity. Fear of market entry. What happens if we make a mistake? This is huge, right? Especially in the last 3 years. In the last 3 years, through my e-campaigns and marketing, I have received responses of China is criminally corrupt. We're never doing anything in China. There's no way I'm setting foot in China. You've got to be joking. The political situation is unstable and they favor Russia. No way I'm going in. But nobody is thinking of the actual goals. Let's refocus and think of the goals that we want to achieve in China. All right. There is a fear for expanding into any market in the world. If you were now to tell me I want to expand into India, I know nothing about India. I would have cold feet. Tell me you want to expand into Brazil. I also know nothing about that market. Now, it's very easy for me to stand up here and say, guys, there's no need to fear China. I was born there, lived there for 17 years. I feel very comfortable in the market. I don't have fear. All right. I've held senior roles, not only in my company, but in my clients' companies. I'm not scared of the market. I'm not scared of what could happen. I'm ready to go. But I can totally understand that some of you might, as leaders, as managers, as board members, might have this fear. You've got to overcome it if you want to hit those goals. Okay. There's always going to be a risk in any expansion that you do. Not enough financial resources to make a big commitment. Now, I use the word big commitment because people underestimate how much money is required to expand into the market. China is not cheap. And people need to get that into their heads. It is not a cheap market. Labor is expensive. And now I am generalizing this, saying in the tier 1 cities and in many of the tier 2 cities, salaries are exorbitant, equal to European levels, social insurance exorbitant, equal to European levels, rent for office space exorbitant, and it's only going further up. It is not cheap. And I'm only talking about labor and rent, office rent. I'm not even talking about everything else. The biggest question I get, and I'm not a marketeer, is how much marketing spend should I budget for when I go into China? Nobody can answer that. But obviously, the more that you spend, the more return you'll get on your investment. The more people you have, salespeople you have on the ground that are pushing your business, the more return you'll get on your investment, right? So it is a big commitment financially. And if you don't have the capital readily available, then maybe now is not the right time for you. And this just leads me on to the fact that budgeting for your China operation is fundamental, right? It's the number one thing you've got to do. Now, the next one, and this comes with the zero alignment, it comes with the financial resources, it comes with the fear, is you've got no idea how to move from a fantastic strategy. You might have a beautiful PowerPoint presentation that you have created for your board of directors, highlighting your China strategy. They've approved it, they've hit the green light, but now what? How do you move from that approval to actually executing the project when, as of 2 days ago, you couldn't travel? You couldn't go there, okay? Now, obviously, with the borders being open, you can go, right? So times have changed in the last 48 hours, but I know for me, I'm not traveling until after summer, okay? I'm also taking my 4th vaccination on Monday because I am going to Hong Kong in February. So you got to think about precautions if you are planning to travel back, all right? Expect to get COVID again because it is literally everywhere. All right, so you're going to have to account for that. Obviously, the beauty is there is no quarantine, and having done 21 days quarantine myself, not something that's pleasant to do, but that's now been revoked. Some people have asked me, what is my perspective on all of this opening up? I do not know what to think. It was very sudden. I have a fear that they might go back to the rules at some point. I don't know. I really don't know. I really don't know. So I'm waiting until after the summer because I want other people to test out how it is to travel over there. Hong Kong has been pretty open for the last 6 months, so I'm confident going there. But as for China, I'm not doing it anytime soon. So I'm sure many of you have other frustrations. You might have communication barriers with the people that are on the ground. You might have misunderstandings of what is going on. You might not have transparency over the business you have thus far developed, which is also a frustration, right? And these are all things you've got to overcome. The key to succeed in China is having absolute transparency over what you're doing. And it is possible to achieve that. So let's get on to what business models exist in China. And all of you that are coming today, I'm making the assumption now you're here because you're interested in setting up an entity. So you might be in one of these phases, right? In one of these existing business models. So option one is direct sales. And by direct sales, I mean you are in the UK, you are selling direct from the UK to China, either B2B or B2C. So you've got e-commerce from your own website that is hosted in the UK, and you're hoping that Chinese nationals are going on that website to buy from you. Alternatively, you've got the cross-border e-commerce model, which means that you're using something like Tmall Global, JD Global in order to sell. And you, in both of those scenarios, it might be working. You might be hitting some sales, but probably not getting the true potential of what is available on the market because it is still not a domestic transaction. It's still a global transaction, cross-border transaction. Then obviously you've got the traditional B2B, right? So you've generated customers from your home country, from the UK, through trade shows, network, whatever might be the case, and you are selling direct from the UK. Okay, so that's direct sales. You might be at a point now where you say, you know, we're not hitting the traction or the targets we want, so we're going to use trade intermediaries. This is usually the flow of what most companies do. Okay, now when I say trade, I'm also referring to service companies. So whether you are trading in product or whether you are trading in service. Okay, so option two is using trade intermediaries. What sales channels exist? You can use a sales rep, sales agent. This means that you're basically hiring a company that is representing your brand, your service, your company, and is going out into the Chinese market and selling. Now, sales reps don't hold any liability, ultimately meaning that the sales physically is still being transacted through your UK company. Okay, the sales rep is just a rep. It's a representative on the ground. All right. The next is distributors, which is obviously the more common form, where the distributors tend to take on more liability, i.e. they are purchasing the products from you, importing them as the importers of record, potentially housing inventory as well. They might even do marketing initiatives on your behalf, and they are then going out to find the clientele. Okay. Then you've got media agencies. Now, this is something that is relatively new as a trade intermediary, because there are now marketing companies who are offering the trade component as well. I have put that separate from actual distributors and sales agents because I want to highlight the following. Distributors and sales agents, their strength is in the network of clients they have. It's not in marketing. Media agencies, their strength is in marketing, not necessarily in finding the network of clients that you need. But they will allow you to utilize their entity to trade with. Okay. So you've always got to look, you kind of have to do a SWOT analysis with the sales agents, with the distributors, with the media agencies, with the TPs to really understand What are their weaknesses and what are their strengths? And this is another trigger that will probably encourage you to say, right, there are too many weaknesses now. Either we have to find new providers, new intermediaries, or we have to do this on our own. Okay, so you've got these TPs. Most of them are just acting as a fulfillment order center. They are not specifically trading. Okay, because they might not have trade as part of their license. Some do. So again, it's kind of shopping around to see what they do, but it's really, you have to really focus on what are their strengths and their weaknesses. A lot of media agencies have now added the TP function into their business scope. A lot of TPs have now added marketing into their business scope. Whether they're good at it or not is up to you to evaluate. Then you've got service invoicing agents. Now, this is specific to service companies. There are intermediaries out there that can act as an invoicing agent for you, because when you set up a service company, you do have a broad spectrum of what you can invoice for. So even if you're in architecture and you're invoicing for architectural designs, for example, you can do that through a service company, depending on how you write the invoice. Okay, a little bit of a loophole there, but there are companies out there that can do this servicing and issue the FAQs for you to your clients then locally. Option 3, option 4, I won't go into big detail. One is using licensees. Obviously, the last 3 questions are vital. What will you be licensing? What will you be relinquishing? What will you continue to control? Right? And that's just a matter of communication, negotiation with these licensors to understand how they operate and how they work. When you're working with licensees, it's really important to do a background check on them to understand who their existing clients are, how they are working with them, get references, start talking to people. The more you talk to the clientele, the more you'll understand again what their strengths and weaknesses are. And the 4th option is using franchisees. Not so common anymore in China. It's really more for the restaurant side of businesses. I haven't really worked with franchises because it's just so niche. And there are specific service providers that can even help you find franchisors in China and set up the whole organization. But again, there, you've got to understand that you're already relinquishing control with licensees. You're going to even relinquish more control with franchises as well. Now, option 5, which Chris already highlighted, is the type of launchpad scheme. So in technical terms, we're talking of using an employer of record service, okay? And I want people to understand what the employer of record service actually means and why you would use it. So I have a lot of clients in the last 3 years who have said, Christina, I'm not ready to commit financially as well as from a risk perspective to set up an entity, but I would really love to hire somebody on the ground who can operate on our behalf, move around, meet clients, meet suppliers, whomever, whatever their job description is. But I don't want an entity, okay? So you have to find a physical entity in China that can hire them. Why? Because freelance agreements in China, there's no law, meaning it doesn't actually exist. So a lot of companies, and some of you out there on Zoom, just so you're aware, if you are a UK company and you are verbally or through email saying to somebody in China, I will pay you XYZ amount every month to do XYZ job, this might be okay in the UK. This is not okay in China. Okay, it can get you into serious trouble. Why? Because most likely that employee, if I were them, would not be declaring that salary. I would be putting it in my pocket, not paying income tax, not paying social insurance. It's just literally net cash in my pocket. Which means if you then ever want to fire that person, they can very easily, because they've got the leverage now, go to the Labor Arbitration Committee and denounce you as a company and say, here are my emails or even WeChat messages, whatever you like, saying that I am hired by this company. They are sending me this amount, but they have never declared my salary. They've never done anything in terms of social insurance. And now they fired me, but I don't know what legal right they have against that. And I have seen some companies, when they haven't taken care of this mess, have been blacklisted in the specific city of where this person is located. Does it mean you can go into another city? Yes, it does. But it just means in that city, your company name, your UK company name is blacklisted. Okay. Signing these agreements, again, you might have rights in the UK, but what can you do in China? You have no entity in China to support this. Now, I have seen horror stories where people have done this, and then it escalates because they go from 1 employee to 5. And in one situation, they actually then were hired by a supplier who sneakily was not paying any of the social insurances and was just pocketing that into his pocket, just paying the net salaries. And then when one of the staff broke his leg on the job, there were envelopes going around the office to collect money to help fund for the guy's hospital bill. Okay, and it got word then to the head office, and they realized actually they hadn't been checking any of this. Guys, it's like in the UK. Don't you feel like you're owed pension? Don't you feel like you're owed social insurance or medical insurance? Don't start doing things the sneaky way because you think you're saving cost. Okay, first of all, there's no equality to the staff member. Okay, and of course, he has a certain level of responsibility to declare all of this. Obviously, if he doesn't do it, that's up to him. But I am seeing more and more of the older generation, i.e. from 35 and up, actually, when they get into these freelance agreements, they are actually declaring the income tax themselves and their portion of the social insurance. Why? Because they're realizing that they need a pension for when they retire. So they're actually doing it on their own prerogative. But just make sure you're treating your staff correctly. So if you want to use this method, you can. Just make sure you're hiring these individuals through an entity that's already registered in China. Okay? And making sure that the whole compensation is declared and properly organized. All right. Now, one thing I will highlight about the employer of record scheme as a con, and it's a big con, is that it's getting more and more difficult to recruit people who are willing to get onto this business model. They are worried because it gives them a sense of instability, that potentially you're not serious about the Chinese market, that if he doesn't do his job well, you might exit and therefore he's out of a job, right? So how long actually is this job for? And he might push you consistently saying, when are you actually going to set up an entity? Because this gives them then a sense of actually you're committed to the market and you're going to do something, but also that they're protected, right? So why would you use an employer of record service? Again, it's to the biggest thing is it's to test the market, right? I understand you have a certain level of fear, but you want to go. So to minimize that fear, you choose the employer of record scheme. You hire somebody, you hire a firm to hire these employees. You do it for 6 months to 1 year, but really after 1 year, you should be evaluating whether you want to set up or not. And have that open dialogue and communication with that staff member to explain, where do you see this going? Okay. Otherwise, you might find that you have high turnover, and that will just lead a bad taste in your mouth, and you might then just want to exit anyhow. All right. Now, the beauty of the Launchpad scheme with the CBBC is they offer office space, meaning your staff has also somewhere to go. You have a community, if you will, of people that are in the same boat as you, where you can then share kind of how your employment is being handled, right? Now, most of my clients, once they approach me for setting up an entity, they've already got staff on the ground. And either they've done it the wrong way or they're using something like the Launchpad scheme, at which point then it's a matter of registering the company, which will take between 3 to 6 months, as long as there's no lockdowns or COVID situations like currently. And then once the entity is established, bank account is opened, the staffs are transferred over. Okay. So disadvantages, again, the biggest disadvantage is really giving the sense of instability to that employee, lack of belonging. And you have to imagine, in the last 3 years, nobody's been able to travel to Europe to even do a launch pad to understand your business philosophy at home, right? So in many instances, what I've seen is we hire the guy, we've given him the job responsibility, and once a week we'll have a call. Once a week is not enough. The guy's on his own, the girl's on his own. She needs daily supervision initially within that probation period to really understand the business philosophy, the company philosophy, what's the ethos, meet people in the various departments. If you're not willing to do the traveling at the moment, do that at least by Zoom, that they understand who they should be communicating with. So the advantages of the employer of record, it's fast, it's legal, you can rest assured you're doing things properly, right? I can tell you now, if you're doing it freelance, it's not proper. And you're just putting yourself at a risk. So this is kind of what the diagram looks like if people are really unsure of how it actually works. You've got 3 parties in this relationship. There's a service agreement between the client, the company, and the employer of record provider. There is a labor contract between the employer of record company and the employee. And then the actual relationship, i.e. the day-to-day communication, is between the client and the employee. Okay. So before I start talking about the last 2 types of business models, all the business models I've mentioned so far require you to have somebody on the ground, part of your ecosystem, to support your business. So this goes without saying, although I am saying it, you've got to beware of working with partners in China, especially in the last 3 years where you could not go at a moment's notice to China to supervise, right? You couldn't even go to check if they existed. Did they really have an office? Did they really have the people they say they have, right? So make sure you do a due diligence on all the partners that you're working with. Like in any other country around the world, scams are popular. There is communication barriers. Many instances, there's a lack of transparency because you as a company don't know what to look for in terms of receiving transparency, or you don't give proper guidelines to your providers locally to ask for that level of transparency. And then obviously there's the cultural language barrier. But what you can do, and you can do this from your desktop, you don't need to ask anybody to do this, is say to your partner, I want to get a copy of your business license. Number 1, ask for it. It's no problem. There's no shame or embarrassment to ask your partner to get a copy of their business license, to actually see if it really exists. If you want to go to further levels, you can ask for their tax registrations, you can ask for their IP registrations, you can ask for their lease agreement. Financial documents, you can always ask. There, you might find they say, you know, why do you need my financial data? I would not give my financial data to anybody, but giving my business license, I have no issue. All right. And don't forget that now in China, the business license is also your tax registration. So once you have a business license with that TIN number, you can go and check online whether they are also registered with the tax bureaus and whatnot. All right. Now, if you don't want to do this at your desk, every single company in China is registered with the Ministry of Commerce. And if you've got the Chinese name, it's better to have 2 pieces of data, Chinese name and address, Chinese address. Anybody can go into the Ministry of Commerce website to find these details out. Financial documents, unless the company has listed to keep it private, would also be public. Okay, so anybody who speaks, reads Chinese can do this. Type Chinese, can go in and do this. You don't need to hire a lawyer. Just go to the Ministry of Commerce website and you can find the details. Now, if you want to go further into doing further due diligence, and again, doing this from your desk, right? Not asking somebody to do a background check on your behalf. You can do a general online search, but no point using Google, use Baidu, right? Use the Chinese search engines to do that research. Call the general fixed phone lines several times throughout the days. Does somebody pick up? Do they not pick up? Is there an answering service? And use your common sense. I mean, if nobody's picking up, kind of weird, right? And I get it. Now everybody gives WeChat IDs and mobile phones. But generally, if a company of a certain size, they will have a receptionist and they will at least have an answering service available. Talk to third parties. So again, don't be shy, right? Ask for customer lists, ask for references, contact those references, contact suppliers, competitors, trade associations, media, to see whether they know about this company and what their background is. If you are working with distributors, TPs, or companies that are promoting the fact that they only work with foreign investors like us, get foreign references. Will help you with the language component, because you can easily then call another UK client of mine and say, hey, we're looking to go into China. And the beauty of this is you can do the reference check on the provider, but you can also ask them for their own experiences. How was it for you to go into China? People always have the time to explain their China journey. Don't ask me why, but everybody loves to do it, especially the war stories, what not to do in the market. So use that as a type of research as well. Check the address. Now, that's a bit tricky to do. And what a lot of people in the last 3 years have done is contact chambers of commerce locally to ask if they can do site visits at specific locations. So you can ask if you can do that. Obtain the AIC file. That's the Ministry of Commerce file. You can do that through a lawyer or an agent if you don't want to do it yourself. As I mentioned in the previous slide, check the official company shop and business license. And then really the last point is the bank account. It is normal with a lot of mainland Chinese companies for the business owners to use their personal bank accounts to transact with. They don't necessarily use their company accounts. Be aware of that, okay? Because you don't know in the end then, if the contract is with the company, the bank account is with the individual, do they ever come back to you and say, you've never paid me? So make sure you're checking really these details, right? To understand who you're collaborating with. Financial report, audit reports, that might be tricky to obtain. But again, if you do a proper background check, like for example, with Dun & Bradstreet, they can get the financial data if you need that. So that's where I would say pay, if you need financial data, pay for it, right? Pay that you get it from a proper provider. For me, signs of suspicion when you're working with all these providers, it's all too good to be true. If things go way too smoothly, that's just not normal in China. Expect hiccups, okay? Hiccups are the norm. If there are no hiccups, then it's weird. Website is only in English. Okay, my website is only in English, but I'm only dealing with foreign investors. I have no Chinese clients. I don't know what about your distributors, how they're operating, what their websites should look like. If they're pushing you all the time, now don't forget, us Westerners, we have a lack of patience, right? And we do want to take our time. The speed in which we do business in Europe is so slow, and I've learned this in the last 3 years, is tremendously slow, that obviously the Chinese will play on that. And they will push you. Why haven't you signed the contract? I need it tomorrow. Sign it, sign it, sign it, sign it. And they will bombard you. If they're doing that, that's for me a bit of a suspicious sign. Okay. If there's no track record, no company email address, if the information just simply doesn't add up, and this is where you've got to listen to your gut and have a bit of common sense. Okay. If they've got no production facilities, no license, no staff, then they simply don't exist, and there's just a guy who's saying that they do exist. If they're considerably cheaper than the market average, that's also weird. So know your market, get price comparisons. If your contact doesn't work for the company, but says that he does, and through your research, you're finding out that he doesn't, big red flag. If you're constantly changing people, I don't like to change people constantly as part of the customer service, but it could very well be that you're constantly changing people. That just shows there's instability within the organization. Okay. And if they were requesting for full upfront payments, don't do it. No need to do it. Okay. Usually you can have 30% down, 70% after. You can have different payment methods. It doesn't have to be full upfront. Okay. Now, these are all things that you can do at your desk, but of course you can also use, like I said, companies like Dun & Bradstreet. There are also other types of localized companies in Hong Kong and China that do background checks. And you just have to basically tick how much information do you actually want. I want to also highlight that these types of companies also do background checks on individuals. Okay, so if you've got a copy of the ID of an individual, they can do a full background check on them as well, which might be something that you would be interested in, especially if you are paying very high salaries to senior personnel just to verify, is their resume correct and is what they're saying correct? So now we're hitting on to the triggers to set up your own entity. What would push you? Now, it's not just one. There's never just one trigger. If you tell me there is one client that is pushing you to set up in China, I would say, don't do it just for one client. It's never a guarantee that this client stays. And then you have an entity in China that is of no use, okay? There has to be a multiple of triggers to really push you to that decision to set up your own subsidiary. And it could be a variety of anything. I've put in 10, could be more than that. One is the volume and the value of the business. Okay, have you actually internally, when you've said that your goal is to make money in China, that's everybody's goal, I would hope that you've created a budget for your Chinese business and set volume targets and value targets. Now, if you hit these volume and value targets, does it mean now that actually you are sustainable, where you can say, I'm going to do this on my own and set up my own entity? Are you being asked by clients to issue fapiaos in your own company name, i.e. they're not comfortable using intermediaries anymore? Or there's been a falling out between the intermediary and your client, i.e. your client doesn't like your distributor anymore, but still wants to buy from you, or doesn't like your sales agent, or doesn't like your licensee. Are you being asked for local representation? Meaning they want somebody on the ground that they can talk to, i.e. customer service relationship manager, or somebody on the ground that is working for you. Are you being asked to stock inventory? Now, this is one where it gets a bit tricky because you can always outsource the warehousing and all of that. What I mean by this is, are they asking you to stock inventory under your own company name and that you are the consignee, i.e. the importer of record? Okay, there's a difference between that, because you still might warehouse literally with a 3PL, but it's a question of who owns those goods on the ground. Do you need to increase your brand image, and hence you need a brand manager sitting on the ground in China? Do you need your own office space, your own warehousing facility? I have several clients who do this on their own, and that was a huge trigger for them. Do you need to start marketing locally and supervise those initiatives? Are you looking for more control over your business? Control for me is probably the biggest trigger. If you're using intermediaries, it's not your own company. You're giving them direction. You might be giving them orders, but they're only fulfilling that, I don't know, a week later, 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, right? So the question is, do you want control over that so things can speed up? And do you want to be independent? I.e., you don't want to work with these intermediaries anymore. You actually want to develop all of the relationships in China yourself. Hence having then, in theory, the fullest amount of transparency over your China business. And again, you might have other triggers. Okay, these are kind of the main ones that I'm seeing. Now, the advantages of having your own entity in China. Let me start off with the con. The con is it's expensive. When you set the setup cost of an entity is one-off. What's expensive is the maintenance of it. You need to have a registered office address, which means you're paying rent, right? You have to do accounting, no choice. You have to submit tax returns every month, if not every quarter. You have to do an audit, no choice. You have to go through a whole series of annual compliance procedures. So the running of a company is expensive. And if you're not going to use it for anything, don't do it. It's just a headache. You have to realize why you're setting up this entity and use it to actually transact. Okay. Now, the first thing, particularly for those of you that are brand companies, is that you will find that amongst the consumers, they will do a background check on you to see whether you actually have an entity in China or not. And I think once you have an entity and you market that you have an entity, it does show a level of commitment to Chinese consumers. I think it's a psychological aspect to that. For B2B companies, you know, the assumption is that if you are setting up an entity in China, there's going to be a relationship manager there. So for them, it's knowing I have somebody to call locally and I can meet with locally. It will increase your brand image and profile as long as you market that you have an entity, right? Use that as a PR incentive. You will have the ability to hire your people in your own company name. And obviously that will provide security, stability to those that might be on the Launchpad scheme moving over. You'll be able to issue FAPIAOs yourself and have full financial control. Now, one of the issues that I've seen, no problem. One of the issues that I've seen with companies using distributors is that they want to have more transparency over the numbers, right? They want to know what their margins are. They want to know really all the nitty-gritty details, which sometimes the Chinese distributors, they don't do their financial management reports so nitty-gritty. So they don't know how to extract that information to be able to give it to you. But if you want to do it, either you do it in your HQ or you set up your own entity and have full trade control and hence full financial control and oversight. Provides a structure that's yours to manage, yours to control, yours to make decisions with, yours to grow, yours to expand, to scale. It gives you the ability and the flexibility to do anything you like in the Chinese market. Okay, so I want everybody to keep that in mind, because the structure you set up today might be for a specific business model that can always change. It's just understanding what the regulations are to change it. But you are then flexible to adapt as you grow and as you scale. You can then apply for your own licenses. And you can also, for some of you that are in the brand sector, you can own your own marketing platforms and have control over them. Right now, you might be finding that your TPs, your media agencies, or whomever, distributors even, have set up and own your social media platforms and then own the content of that as well. So the question is, do you want to have that control, right? Because that might be your major collateral in China. So the last two options are about setting up. Now, I can't talk about China without first talking about Hong Kong. And using Hong Kong as a stepping stone, okay? I said this 18 years ago when I first started out. In this industry and sector, Hong Kong was huge. Hong Kong's not huge anymore. So I do want to give you a warning. If you are going to use Hong Kong, because again, you've got a fear about going into China, and you feel Hong Kong is still under a common law system, it's safer, we can protect ourselves, all well and good. It is a waste of time to set up Hong Kong or even Singapore or any other intermediary for China if you're not using it. You are going to waste money. I get extremely frustrated when clients come to me because I've issued them an invoice for the annual compliance and they say, yeah, but Christina, this is so expensive and I don't need the entity. I'm not using it. Yeah, but you set it up. You had it for a reason. It's not my problem that your strategy has changed. We have to follow compliance procedures. You have to follow compliance procedures with this entity. If you're not using it, then shut it down. But don't now complain to me because there's another invoice. You'll be spending money on maintaining that entity. So whether you think of Hong Kong or Singapore, we don't have a business in Singapore, so I put Hong Kong in here. Whether you choose Singapore or Hong Kong or any other intermediary location, make sure there's a strategic reason of why you're setting it up. Now, for me, the only strategic reason would be the following. One, you've got so much fear about China that actually you're going to use Hong Kong as that stepping stone to handle all of the trade control for China, but also only focus on Tmall Global and JD Global if you're in the consumer sector. That's not going to give you the return on investment you want because Tmall Global is not Tmall. JD Global is not JD. It's not the domestic business. You're still just doing cross-border. Okay? Hong Kong and Singapore should only come into play if your long-term vision is not just China, but APAC. If you tell me, Christina, I want Hong Kong because I want that to be my Asian regional hub, because my first intention is China, and then my next intention is Malaysia, Vietnam, I don't know, wherever else you want to go, Korea, Taiwan, fine. Then I'm in agreement because you have thought long-term in the next 10 years that actually your strategy is to go in an APAC direction. Then I also know that you're going to actually trade with it because you will use Hong Kong to trade with those other jurisdictions because you can. Okay. You can also use Hong Kong to trade with China. It's not going to give you the same, you can't localize it. You can't trade in RMB. I mean, you can, but it has to be company to company and there's no FACAO issuance. Okay. So please, 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 when you're thinking of Hong Kong, and I've done this I've done this diagram based on selling into China, obviously. Hong Kong really should only be there if APAC is your ultimate goal, not just China, okay? China might be your first plan, which means that you've got to expect in the first 2 to 3 years that all you're doing is paying for the maintenance of that entity and it will cost you money, okay? And it's not cheap, all right? If the intention is never to ever utilize it, don't do it. Go direct. Really makes no sense, okay? The clients that I have today that are utilizing Hong Kong, either they have hired a China BD manager, but I want to say China, Hong Kong, Greater China, let's call it Greater China BD manager who's already located in Hong Kong. Because he's already located in Hong Kong, they set up that Hong Kong entity. Okay, that would be one reason. The other reason is that they already have distributors in Hong Kong and they're going to localize that business. Or they're already using Tmall Global, JD Global. So they're going to localize that business instead of doing it from the headquarters or from the UK entity, right? And then the third is obviously eventually they want to, oh, and then the third is it's not just about the BD manager, they actually want certain key senior management people to sit in Hong Kong. So regional CFOs, regional GMs to move there. Okay, now, what is the current situation with Hong Kong? A lot of companies have moved their regional senior managers to Singapore. Some have moved to Dubai. Obviously, since Sunday, I'm curious to see if anybody's going to move back this year. I really cannot tell you what the situation is going to be of Hong Kong. Okay. Here are a bunch of recommendations of why to set up in Hong Kong. This is part of my spiel. I've got to promote it. But really, you have to internally evaluate whether it makes sense for you. So option 7 is setting up then your own subsidiary in China. And I just want to say, setting up an entity in Hong Kong, you can set it up within 3 to 5 working days. The difficulty will be the bank account opening, which can take several months, but it's straightforward. And, you know, key decisions obviously have to be made in terms of tax optimization, who's going to act as the directors, etc. But you can have a virtual office address. You know, it's like setting up at a UK entity. It's pretty straightforward. Setting up your subsidiary in China is more complex because now we're getting into the technical side of what it means to operate an entity. You have to make some key decisions. And this is where I see the zero alignment amongst the decision makers, okay? And where it can halt then the progression that you need to actually set up the entity. So I call it the China Incorporation Blueprint because it is kind of a blueprint of how you actually want to set up. So for me, there are 4 milestones that you have to think about: the structure, the people, the location, and the financial aspect, okay? And we're going to run through, do we still have time, Chris?
Yep.
We're good? So we're going to run through these 9 key decisions that have to be made. So the step 1 is the structure, all right? What type of entities can you actually set up, all right? And what is the business scope? And the key thing is to understand how valuable that business scope is for you, because unlike Hong Kong, and I believe also in the UK, where you can be vague, in China, you have to be specific, okay? And it can lead you to issues with your auditor at the end of the year, because audits are required if your transactions do not follow what is in your business scope, all right? So these are the types of entities that you can establish. Now, representative offices, I don't really want to talk about. For me, they're useless. You can't invoice through them. All you can do is hire people through them. They're marketing tools. They were really historically very popular. Nowadays, I would say if you're a real estate agent that is marketing properties in Europe, then set up a rep office, which is your showroom, because you're never going to invoice because the sale of the real estate will be done direct. Okay, that's the only thing that I know nowadays. It's these foreign real estate agencies setting up these rep office showrooms. That's it. All right. But otherwise, if you're in trade, if you're in service, it's really useless. And I can guarantee you within 12 to 24 months, you'll have to change into a limited liability company because you'll want to trade yourself. Now, all the other entities are actually limited liability companies. That's it. So in China, there's the rep office and the limited liability companies. However, I know that most of you have probably done a bit of research and have found these terms: WFOE, FICE, domestic entity, joint venture, and FIPs. In the end of the day, they are all limited liability companies. Okay? If there's any doubt with that point, please let me know, because that's a critical point to mention. You are setting up an LLC, a limited liability company. Why have we put WFOE, FICE, DOI? Because it depends on who is the shareholder, and it depends on what is the business scope. Now, I also want to highlight that every single service provider has a different interpretation of this. This is mine. Because in the end of the day, you are literally setting up a limited liability company. That's it. Okay? And ultimately, it comes down to what you're writing in your business scope, and ultimately, who is the owner of that limited liability company. That's it. Okay? Now, I also want to highlight, if you read what a WFOE was 10 years ago, if you read an article from 10 years ago of what a WFOE is, that is not what it is today. I just want to highlight that as well. So make sure that if you are doing any research on the types of entities that exist in China, you're reading articles that are no older than 12 months. No point reading anything that's older than that. So don't read anything from 2021 and before. No point. Would be outdated information. Okay. So business scope. You have to choose your business activity wisely. Okay. So just to give you an understanding, when you're setting up a company in China, you go into the Ministry of Commerce and you say, set up new company. You get then a questionnaire, all online. Part of that questionnaire is, what is the business scope? I.e., what business activities do you want to do? Now, in the past, you could just write what the activities were. Now it's a pull-down menu of over 1,000 different activities. And you've got to choose the right terminology, okay? Which doesn't always match when you do a draft, right, of it. So the key thing is taking a piece of paper and saying, what activities do you want to do? Import, export, domestic sales, technical consulting. Go into the details and also be very specific about the products, okay, and the product categories. All right, you have to go into the details, because again, if you do something that, one, actually requires a joint venture partner because it's in the restricted or prohibited list, we have to be aware of that. And two, we have to formulate the right terminology that we're choosing the right activity. And I had a third, and now I lost track of my thought. It will come back to me. So you've got to know what you want to do. Now, the issue is, at least for me, is that I know what I want to do today. I might know what I want to do in 5 years. I have no idea how my business in China is going to look like in 10 years. But we've got to estimate and we've got to predict. So I usually say to clients, get an A4 piece of paper, make 3 columns. First column is what do you want to do now? Second column is what do we see ourselves doing within the next 5 years, or at least 3 years? And what is our vision for China? Because the vision might take 10 years, 20 years, we're not sure. Okay. My vision, I don't know, is that in 10 years, I don't know, I'm already doing all the activities I want to do. I don't know. I need to use somebody else as an example. My vision is that in 10 years, I want to have 100 retail outlets throughout China. Okay. That's not going to happen within the first 3 years. It's going to be a vision. All right. Your lawyer, your corporate service provider, whoever you're utilizing to help you set this up needs to understand what those 3 things are. What you want to do now, what's urgent for now, what has to be done within the next 3 years, and what's your vision? Because you've got to create a business scope that fits that. And you need to know what's being put now in the business scope and what needs to be added later on. Again, this is what gives you transparency. Now, a lot of companies rush this because they're only focused on the now. And the minute that they want to start expanding, either they don't do it and they get in trouble with the auditor and they've done things outside of the business scope, or they get denounced by employees or by suppliers or by customers, which might get you even more trouble because you'll get investigated. And it doesn't help you also if you suddenly want to do a trade transaction and you don't have the appropriate license readily available, right? So again, we want transparency. If you don't give transparency to your provider, they can't help you to tell you what is the right business scope and how to progress, right? So make sure you do that exercise. So this is your homework. I've put in action plans. If you guys want to have a copy of this presentation, let me know. But basically take a paper and write it down. The next thing I would recommend you to do is, I'm pretty sure all of you have competitors that are already in the market. Why are you not researching those competitors? The first thing you can do is go to the Ministry of Commerce website and get an extract of their business license and understand what their business scope is. And most of you might already know what they're doing in terms of activities or have interviewed people who've worked for them. So you know whether they are actually transacting correctly within their business scope or they are doing things in a loophole sort of way. This is going to give you transparency as well. Many of these companies would have been probably incorporated 10, 15, 20 years ago, where the formulation of setting up your company is very different from today. So they might never have thought of expanding their business scope. I'm not now telling you to denounce your competitors, okay? I'm just telling you it's wise to get insight. Again, it's about transparency. How are your competitors set up? Okay, how have they done their structure? Again, I'm not telling you to imitate them, but again, it gives you the options and the understanding. Make your scope as broad as possible, although keep in mind that there will be certain limitations. So for example, if you want to add e-commerce, you have to have the ICP license. If you want to do retail, i.e. have a real retail outlet, you need to have the lease agreement of a retail space, i.e. the documents from that retail space have to say retail, okay? And be prepared that the AIC, the Ministry of Commerce, will come back, might amend, adapt, downsize your original scope, but then you have to understand what those consequences are. I just want to say, again, this is a matter of your service provider giving you that transparency to say, how has that business scope been changed from the date of application to when you actually got the receivable? Because you need to know these details, right? Now, decision 2, based on structure, is the capital investment and the term of validity. Again, financial resources, all right? The terms I want you to know are total investment and registered capital. Registered capital is what you put into the company physically as capital. Total investment is a ratio percentage, which according to the current foreign investment law states that you don't need to provide this, but in the application you actually do have to provide this. So you have to be aware of what that ratio number is. If you're under 500,000 US dollars in terms of registered capital, it's a 70 to 30 ratio. So 70 registered capital, 30 total investment. Okay. Registered capital is your working capital, meaning you're going to use that money. It's not just going to sit in a bank account. You're physically using it to pay off your expenses. In the case of the 70-30, that 30% difference is what I call emergency funds. The technical term is foreign debt loan. It's your foreign debt loan, okay? Loans don't exist in China like they do in the Western world. So your registered capital, it goes in. The only way you're going to get that money back is through dividends. It's not through a loan. The only loan that exists is the foreign debt loan, which is this 30% share, okay? And you don't even have to put that money in if you don't want to. Now, if this is going over people's heads, because I see Mark's look at me.
I didn't get that last point.
You didn't get, okay.
About not putting the money in.
Okay, so I'll give you an example. Let's say your registered capital is 70,000. Your foreign debt loan is 30,000. The total is 100,000, okay? The 70,000 must come into your bank account.
Yeah.
And you're going to use that money to pay off all your starting expenses. That 30% foreign debt loan, I call them emergency funds because they never have to come in.
Does that actually have to come into the bank?
Not at all. Okay, it is if your 70% runs out, your cash flow is not good, you've got negative cash flow, you need funds straight away. One option is to activate that foreign debt loan, which can be paid back.
Exceed it.
You can't exceed it. No, and you have to open up a separate bank account for it, which you have to account for 30 working days for that. Yeah. Now, a lot of companies I've met get advice to do a match, meaning that they don't do this share differential. So they just say, I'm only going to put in the 70,000. They don't even allocate anything for the 30%. Zero, which means you don't even have emergency funds in case you need emergency funds. Right? I always think better to have emergency funds that you might never use, readily available, just in case. Because the number one downfall of most foreign companies is lack of cash. And since the lockdowns in April, May, June, I have a very strict criteria with certain clients now as a learning lesson. You should have at least 5 months worth of expenses in your bank account just to be sure. Now, for example, there's COVID rampaging through. We work with ICBC. None of our relationship managers are working. They're all out sick. I have no clarity over my capital account and any overseas funds that are coming in, because that is the old-fashioned way of communication. They let you know if the money arrives or not, right? So having emergency funds is just there. There are other ways of getting money, guys. I'm just saying from a capital perspective, this is one method. Is that okay, Mark? Okay. And I also want to highlight there are no minimum capital requirements. So the lowest I have ever gone with an application for a client is 50,000, the equivalent of 50,000 renminbi. Why did we do that? Because the client knew exactly when he was going to receive payments from clients. So he knew that he was going to have a positive cash flow immediately. Okay. Now, how are you going to know how much to put in? People always say, oh, Christina, you've done 50,000. Let's just put 50,000. Because obviously the downside of the registered capital is that it is your liability. You are liable in China up to that amount. Okay. But the question is, how much money do you actually need on the ground? What are your expenses? How many employees do you have? How much is that going to cost you? And although this client was sure his clients paid him, and he got lucky that his clients did pay him, there's always a risk that your clients don't pay you. And then what do you do? So I have had clients who for 3 months have had no cash, haven't been able to pay salaries. What does that lead to? Employee turnover. Why should I stay if I'm not even getting paid? Right? So you've got to think about creating that budget and making sure it's a solid budget and getting it validated too. Now, I've put in that first sentence. I'll make a note on it. Most tax bureaus like to see that you have a registered capital of more than the equivalent of 1 million renminbi. Okay. In addition to that, just recently, I've had one client who they want to increase it to the equivalent of 1 million renminbi because they actually have clients who are not liking that they've got a low registered capital. Okay. So if you have the money, then that should at least be your base minimum, if you can. If you cannot, it's absolutely fine. Again, I just say they like to see it. You might have issues with clients. Just be aware of it. No business plan, no budget is required to be seen by any government authority. So you got to create this on your own. Nobody's forcing you to do it. And although you might all be sitting there going, of course we would do this. Yeah, I have clients who don't. So just to highlight, don't be lazy. Do a proper budget, get it validated. When does the capital have to be injected? So the registered capital never has to be injected, but must be injected within the term of validity of your entity. So if you decide to set up an entity, the minimum validity will be 10 years, the maximum 50 years. If you choose 50 years, you've got 50 years to put in that registered capital. Does not have to be brought in overnight. Okay. There's no right or wrong what number you choose. In my opinion, I would choose the 50 years. If you're setting up a company, you're already committed to the market, just go for the 50 years. You've got 50 years to inject the registered capital. That also means you don't have to do anything from a compliance perspective, except the mandatory annual compliance. And 6 months prior to the 50 years, you do a renewal. Okay. Step 2 is the people. So who's the shareholder? This also gets a blockage because there's zero alignment on who you're going to choose. For those of you that are entrepreneurs, you own your own businesses. Will you as an individual invest, or will you choose your own company? For those of you that are working for companies, do you have holding companies? I don't know, in Isle of Man, in Guernsey, or other places, other jurisdictions? Do you use your operational entity? These are all decisions that have to be made in terms of who is the shareholder. Like I mentioned earlier about Hong Kong, do you use that or Singapore as a structure, as a shareholder to go into China? Keep in mind, if you're not using that holding company, the tax officers in China will want to verify the economic and commercial substance of that holding company, i.e., is it operational or not? If it is not operational, you will not benefit from the double taxation agreements that exist with China. So they could ask you, we want to see headcount in that company. They could ask you, show me transaction proof that transactions have run through that company. So make sure, they might even ask you about effective management. Who's sitting in that Hong Kong company? Is anybody sitting in Hong Kong and making decisions? You don't know what they might ask. But keep in mind, every tax bureau in China is out there to make more taxes from you. So if they think that, you know, you're sneakily getting away, they might raise these questions that you have to provide this proof. And if you can't find the proof, you'll have the higher tax rate. So we mentioned Hong Kong already, so I'll skip over that bit. Corporate management, this is a huge blockage in China. This is who you've got to appoint within the structure. And this is where the fear sets in. Nobody wants to hold these roles. Their fear is around the personal liability they might have should they hold any of these senior management roles in China. Now, fear will be completely eliminated if you incorporate corporate governance into your Chinese company. If you don't incorporate corporate governance, then yeah, I would be scared too, because there's nothing protecting me. So number one is think about getting a director's liability insurance. That will ease their concerns a lot. And the second is create a corporate governance guideline on how this company is going to operate. Who makes what decisions? Who operates bank accounts? Who has the licenses of the company? Who's managing the financial aspect of the company? Who's reviewing the financial aspect of the company? to ease the fear in the people that will be appointed. Okay. Now, delegating power always requires a certain degree of trust. I know a lot of companies in Europe who have hired Chinese nationals to hold that power without actually knowing who they are because they were just newly hired. It's putting all your eggs in one basket, right? Trust is developed over time. Loyalty is developed over time. Be wary of who you're appointing suddenly in these roles, okay? And spread your arms. I mean, people in the UK, nobody has to be residing in China, by the way, to hold these roles.
Sorry, just
Yeah.
on that point, with regards to the kind of COVID situation, I think that's caused problems for a lot of companies with regards to having directors sat outside China unable to kind of travel there. So I don't know if you can speak to that.
So you don't have to travel there. There is no law in China which states that you as a board of director, general manager, legal rep, supervisor have to reside in China or have to travel to China or spend a certain amount of time in China. There's no law. Okay. I've not been in China for 3 years.
Yeah.
And I'm not worried for that reason to go back.
What about situations with chops and things like that?
So I didn't bring my chop with me today, but my company chop is with me at all times. Okay, I'm not in China at the moment. The legal rep chop and the company chop are with me. Financial chop is with my right-hand person in Shanghai. All original licenses are also in Shanghai. Again, this is corporate governance. Okay, this is about implementing a guideline to say where is what, who has control over what. Now, I will say this, has my 3 years or for my team in China, have the last 3 years been efficient in terms of doing stuff for our company? No, because they're reliant on me to print stuff out, chop it, and then courier it back. Yeah, so not efficient. Do they have to wait 2 extra days? Yeah. Were 5 couriers stuck in FedEx over the lockdown period for 3 months? Yes. Okay, but that gives me control. Yeah.
But actually, it is quite, in my opinion, a good idea to have someone in the city or the region you've registered your company with a certain amount of powers as supervisor, because they, for instance, my company wouldn't exist if it wasn't for our supervisor in Shenzhen. She's done an amazing job.
So I agree with you.
At going to all the government offices in person.
I completely agree with you. But like I said earlier, one of the biggest constraints is the fear of leaders, right? So I agree. I want the chop with me. I want to have that control. That's my decision as the leader of the China operation.
Yeah, but it's not, I'm not talking about the chop, just the chop. I'm talking about this, she's been able to go to the government office, the tax office.
Yeah, I mean, you can hire somebody to do that. You can also outsource that. You can have your lawyer do that. You can have anybody do it.
Yes, but physically go.
Yeah. I mean, you can hire lawyers on the ground who will take that role. Well, I mean, you definitely need an accountant on the ground, for sure. You can't do the financial work from abroad, right? You can also have a lawyer keep the chops in China and keep the licenses in China. You can, there's so many variables that you can do to create security on that. I just don't want to leave my company chop locally. I want it with me. I want the legal rep chop with me as well. I mean, that's just my personal decision. Now, a lot of people will say, well, I don't trust the people that are on the ground. Okay, guys, it depends now. How long have you known those people? Okay, if you've known them only since yesterday, I probably also wouldn't trust them with all of these things. But trust is developed over time. Now, I have a dilemma with one client right now who's been working with a GM, a guy who's a GM level, who has utilized his own company to start the business on their behalf for the last 2 years. We've incorporated the new company. Employees are transferred over. He's been nothing but compliant, reasonable, ideal. And they still don't want to give him the authority over the chops. And for their business, it will cause constraints on efficiency, for sure, because they've got daily contracts to be signed. So in my opinion, I understand why they're doing it. They're scared because now it's suddenly their entity. But when it was his own entity, they didn't care, right? And now it's suddenly their entity and they're causing this constraint. And they're actually showing him that after 2 years, they still don't trust him. What's the point of having the entity to begin with and having him lead the team and hire everybody and control the whole operation? I think that's a pity. Okay. And again, I like the guy. So I've met him. I know him. I like him. He's reasonable, Western mentality, although he is Chinese, right? Now, do you have bad eggs in China? Of course you got bad eggs. I know people who have stolen the company kit and stolen the chops because they could, and they did, right? There's always this risk, okay? So I will also say that I have clients whose staff are so, they get so upset when they can't get signed contracts within 24 hours because they feel like it will look bad with the clients, right? You wait another 24 hours, is it really going to kill you? No. And it eases the worry of the head office, right? So it's also a balancing act that you have to have with the staff who are impatient to get things done, right? And it's a balancing act to build the trust, build the loyalty with the team. Now, again, here can bring tremendous zero alignment amongst decision makers about what is the best way of doing it. And this is where blockage occurs when you're actually looking to set up your entity. So questions to ask management, I would actually ask the questions around more on how are you going to actually operate the entity? Meaning, who's going to be the finance manager? Who's going to be the bank signatory? Who's going to approve payments? Who's going to keep control of the company chops? Who's going to keep control of the actual original licenses? All right. Ask operationally, how are you going to function and who's going to do what? Who's got the authority to do what? Okay. The next one is location. Now, you might be wondering why I've put company name in the whole section on location. It's because when you create your company name, the location is inside. One thing I want to highlight is when you create your company name, it's usually 3 to 4 characters. English names are not registered. It's just the Chinese name. You have the business type, which is why the business scope is very important. You've got the city of where you're incorporating, and then company limited at the end because you are a limited liability company. Okay. One thing I want people to remember, and I want to go to this, is that your Chinese company name might not match your trademark registration, which might not match your domain registration because these are 3 completely separate registrations. So you might have registered your trademarks 20 years ago. Does not mean that that name is available for your Chinese company registration. It has to be checked. Okay. Your domain registration might not also match. So if this is very important that all these 3 things align and match, you got to do that research now and check. Keep in mind, you're only registering the Chinese name. I'll give you an example of us at Woodburn Management Consulting Shanghai Company Limited. I only market my English name. You will only ever see my Chinese name when I issue you a fapiao. That's it. Otherwise, I don't use it. Okay. So it also depends on you internally. What is the image you want to create? Do you need a Chinese brand name? Do you not? How do you want to develop the business in China? Decision 6 is probably the most important and the one that people underestimate the most. You need to sign a lease agreement for a registered office address. And people want to skim this step. They don't want to focus on this. But I want to provide you very briefly, there's a whole section here on this because it's, for me, the one that people make the biggest mistake on. First of all, when you register your office address, I'm going to take Shanghai as an example. If you choose Shanghai, fantastic. You then have to choose a district. Let's say you choose Huangpu district. You then register with the tax bureau in Huangpu district. That means your tax bureau is in that district. Every district in Shanghai has its own tax bureau. Okay? For example, for me, I hate the Pudong tax bureau. I think they're inflexible, very hard to work with. I really like the Putuo, Huangpu, tax bureaus. Jing'an, also a bit of a pain in the ass. Why do I say that? Because in the end of the day, everybody wants to make tax money. Each bureau has a KPI that they have to achieve, right? And if they are stringent, rigid, strict, they will attack you, get the most tax dollars, tax renminbi out of you. And again, you want to work with a tax office where they're flexible, they listen, they understand what you're actually doing. Now, you might all be amazed. We talk to our tax officer daily. We don't hide information from our tax officer because this guy, actually it's a woman, is on my side. Now, I know a lot of foreign companies that are hesitant about being transparent with their tax officers. If you're not being transparent, it means you're already hiding stuff that you don't want to get caught. I have no interest in getting caught. I'm there for the long-term commitment of the company. I have open dialogue. I ask for advice from my tax officer on how to structure certain trade transactions, service transactions, right? You should be thinking and having this type of mindset and mentality. Open dialogue. So ultimately, you also want to have the insights of knowing which tax bureaus are kind of the best to work with, where you know you'll get a bit of flexibility. We have one client in Shanghai in Fengshan district. They have very small number of foreign invested companies there. The tax officers are clueless on how to deal with foreign invested companies. Clueless.
Christina, the tax varies quite a bit by region, right? So if you, depending on what sector you're in, I know that retail and Greater Bay was doing a lot recently to try to encourage businesses to open in Shenzhen and other places. How do you think best to sort of approach?
So I will say this about all the tax policies, incentives that are being offered. They're being offered today. What's your tax planning? When are you planning on being profitable? Are you planning to be profitable now or in 5 years? Because in 5 years, I don't know what the tax incentives look like. And nobody can give you that insight. So if you're planning on being profitable today, i.e. you set your company up in 2023 and you plan by the end of 2023 to be profitable, then these tax incentives are something you should investigate. If you're setting up today in 2023, and actually you're only planning on being profitable in 6 years, do not rely on these tax incentives. They might not exist. During COVID, as a small scale taxpayer, we did not have to pay VAT. We had the freedom of not freedom, actually, we did not pay VAT as a small scale taxpayer. The regulation just changed January 1st, 1%. It's gone up. Used to be 3%, but now we have to pay. And it's overnight. There was no memo. January 1st, released any invoices, fapiaos issued from January 1st, there's a 1% VAT now applicable. So regulations in terms of tax change often, frequently, and most importantly, I do not know in 6 years what that landscape is going to look like. So tax planning. You've got to create your budget, look in the long term. Are we going to be non-profitable for 5 years? Because actually, this is the moment of scale and growth. Or are we going to be profitable? And then what's that profitability number look like? Is it in the tens of millions? Or is it like, yeah, it's 100,000 here, 200,000 there, i.e. you're still in that scale up phase. So I mean, you can, by all means, guys, it's an incentive, right? And it's very attractive because they want you to go and set up there. Looking at a location just based solely on tax, I think is a wrong point of view because you don't know when you're going to be profitable. Unless you've shown me a proper tax planning diagram and you can allocate to me where and when you're going to be profitable. So, you know, we have now a new district that's just not district, a new little zone that's opened up in Putuo district. The promotions bureau reached out to me. They said, for all of your clients, Christina, we will give free rent. I said, okay, for how long? Just free rent. I said, no, for how long? 1 year, 6 months, 5 years? What is it? Oh, well, as soon as they have the first employee and they move in a real office, then we will charge rent. I said, okay, then I can plan with the client, right? But you know, they're very vague, right? Initially. So when you're choosing your registered office address, definitely think about the tax component. Keep in mind, everybody, that I have to use me as an example. We're based in Huangpu district. If I would say tomorrow, I can't find a new office space, so I'm going to move to Pudong. I have to do a tax closure audit with the bureau in Huangpu, which takes 3 months because it's an audit to make sure I have no outstanding tax liabilities to then reopen in Pudong. Which means for 3 months, I can't issue fapiaos because I can't purchase those fapiaos from the tax bureau. Okay. If you say to me, Christina, today I want to be in Shanghai, but then tomorrow you tell me you want to be in Beijing, 2 options. 1, you open up a branch office in Beijing, or 2, you liquidate in Shanghai and open up in Beijing. You can't just move your company from one city to another city. That's why location is fundamental and people don't spend enough time on this. And I'm not a real estate agent, but whatever real estate agents are out there, just to let you know, they offer location studies, like professional location studies, where they investigate your business, where you are today, where you're going to be, and they will help to find the appropriate locations. Invest in these studies, guys. And the zones, although they might give you lovely incentives today, they might not be there tomorrow. And I can also tell you, if one guy today offered that incentive and oopsie daisies, he's left that zone in 2 weeks and you've got a new guy to communicate with, he might know nothing about that incentive. So unless you've got something in writing that's chopped from the zone that these are the preferential treatments, don't necessarily believe it either. I've got a whole series of slides here on this, but I don't want to spend too much time because we might be running out. But there,
10 more minutes.
10 more minutes. So there's the legal aspect that I want you guys to be aware of. And I want you guys to be aware also of the tax aspect, okay? Please, 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 please take this seriously, okay? Business center versus operational office, I'll just highlight this. Great starting point as a market entry. Definitely think about the business centers. WeWork, Regis, Executive Center. I'm now talking about the ones in Shanghai, sorry. CEO Suite, Apollo, but they have the same then in Beijing as well. I mean, there are thousands of business centers out there. Step 4 is in relation to finance, okay? So as part of the finance, tax planning. Make sure you are doing certain levels of tax planning. But most critically, think about the bank. There's no right or wrong here. And I don't know if any banks have registered, but I'm going to be brash. I have not personally had good experiences with foreign banks in China. All right. But you might have board members who say, I will only work with a foreign bank. From an operational day-to-day practicality, I really don't like them. VCCP is my client, so I'm highlighting what their bank is. Took forever to open and not necessarily the best. Chinese banks are fantastic. Now, again, there might be this fear level. I don't want to work with a Chinese bank. They're going to steal my money. They're never going to give it to me. Guys, I just did a dividend payment. It may have taken me 6 months to do it, but I got the money back to our shareholder. Okay, so working with the Chinese banks is absolutely fine. Don't just think about how tedious it is to open up the account. Incorporation of an account is one-off. Think about the longevity of that relationship. How long are you planning on working with that bank? What can they offer you in terms of credit, in terms of any of the services? So actually, you should really be investigating what services do you need from that bank. Okay, maybe a foreign bank will only give you loans, domestic loans. I don't know. Analyze, what do you need from the bank? Now, the beauty right now with COVID, and I don't know as of 2 days ago whether this will change this year, but I'm hoping it will not. In the last 3 years, you could open up the bank's accounts remotely, meaning you could do a Zoom call with the banks. Now in Shenzhen, this was not feasible. In Shanghai and other cities, it was feasible, where you could do a Zoom call. Or just do a video of yourself holding up your original passport. I'm praying that this will continue, but I can't tell you that now. So do your homework. I always say research 3-4 different banks, have communication with them, talk to the relationship managers. That's not your lawyer's job. That's not your service provider's job. That's your job. We might be collaborating with your bank, but you guys have to choose it, right? I can give you advice on certain experiences that we've had on a day-to-day basis, but it's ultimately your decision. Keep in mind, as a People's Bank of China requirement, the bank will go to visit your office now. And this was from August 2020, which means that if you have a virtual office space, make sure you've got a provider who knows to answer the questions to the bank. Okay. And this is just for the opening of the account. It takes about 25-30 working days. And then it takes another 10 working days to open up the online management platform. So to do online banking. All right. Remember, please don't just think about the bank based on incorporation process. Think about the bank in terms of the longevity of that relationship. Value-added tax. Now, I am saying this here because actually, when you want the incorporation process to be smooth, this decision kind of has to be made sooner rather than later. Value-added tax. You need to understand whether you're going to be a small-scale taxpayer or a general VAT taxpayer. Small-scale taxpayer basically means that you cannot offset the VAT on purchases that you have made. As a general VAT taxpayer, you can offset the VAT from purchases. Okay, you might have just heard, we are a small-scale taxpayer. Why? Because I don't buy goods, right? I'm just delivering services. The only time I buy goods is for my office. If there's new laptops, computers, desks, things like this, which is kind of one-off here and there, I don't mind if I don't have to offset that. It's fine. It's peanuts, doesn't affect at all my VAT status. In order to truly understand what VAT status would be good for you, you should do a simulation, which is part of the tax planning exercise, okay? It's understanding how you're trading, what is the value of those trade transactions, and in the end of the day, is it better for you to remain as a small-scale taxpayer or to upgrade to the general VAT taxpayer status? Okay. For those of you that are going to be trading from day one in high volumes and high values, I would say go to GVAT straight away. For those of you that are scaling up slowly, it might be an advantage from a tax optimization standpoint to remain as a small-scale taxpayer. So again, if you guys want a copy of the slides, let me know, because then you can read through this. But you have to kind of make that decision. And again, I am hoping that it just leads you to do that budget exercise, that tax planning exercise, and understanding when trade will start in terms of product, goods or services. Now, I haven't put this under the corporate management structure because it's separate. But you do need to appoint a finance manager, and the name of that individual has to be submitted during the application procedure. So the question is, do you outsource your finance or do you hire a CFO? What do you do? Okay, there's no right or wrong here. In the end of the day, I just want you guys to think about these points. It's the cost of outsourcing it versus the cost of hiring someone in-house. What does the talent pool look like at the moment? How easy is it to recruit and to go through all those interviews? Do you know how to evaluate the skill set of accountants in China? Do you want somebody who you've hired, who you're not sure if they know what they're doing, versus outsourcing to a provider who you know has experience, I don't know, in retail or B2B or whatever else? Make sure that even when you're outsourcing, you're interviewing those companies to understand what type of clients they're dealing with. And if you are in a very, very specific industry or sector, okay, agriculture, you want to work either with an accountant who's got experience in agriculture or an outsourced provider who's experienced with agriculture. We've never done agriculture in our life. We would not be the right provider, okay? Think about language and culture. Accountants in China are expensive, okay? Not cheap. Now, if I can give one piece of advice, if you're going to hire somebody in-house, please go for a finance manager CFO level as your first hire, do not go for a junior accountant. They bring you nothing. Because in your startup phase, you want to make sure that the foundation of your accounts and your finances is stable, okay, and is correct, especially if your growth strategy is to scale very quickly. So make sure, actually, I can say this also for outsource providers, interview them, meet several, get an understanding of who they are, okay? So those are the 7 business models, and ultimately, for setting up your own entity, the 9 key decisions that have to be made. And I've made this very generic, guys, because for every single company, it'll be very, very different. So make sure you are raising these questions and these topics with your lawyers, your providers, whomever you're collaborating with, to get that transparency as much as possible. So yeah, and again, if you guys are interested, we have a Thrive in China roundtable that we do every Wednesday on different topics. If you're interested in joining, these are free. It's just we talk about different stuff every Wednesday, and have a bit of a debate as well if people are on. All right. So I'm going to leave it to Khan now.
Obviously, we've covered quite a lot there, so we'll do a Q&A just at the end. Let me just bring up the slides. Excellent.
Do you guys need a break?
I think let's do it.
How do I?
You go. So yeah, from VCCP International.
So hello everyone. I am Cam from VCCP, which is an advertising creative agency. So I myself from Hong Kong, same as Christina, but I left Hong Kong 12 years ago. Then I moved to China, Germany, New York. 5 years ago, London. So it's a bit of a journey. So that's why I'll be able to stand here and explaining about my journey and setting my office in China. This is a little bit background about me. So obviously, as Christina was saying, like VCCP is one of her clients. So we collaborate, also create CBBC as well together and set up office pre-COVID. So just 1 month before the COVID. So it's been really, really tricky and interesting journey. So I would like to share with you today. So first of all, this is what we're talking about. And then today, I think the major things we're talking about, the why and how. So Christina brilliantly explained the how. So now I'm going to talk about my personal experience, how exactly, and what the flags and watch outs. And Q&A in the end, of course. So why do we want to do business in China? So if you're a company, of course, it might be a creative marketing company or maybe some other company. But you need to ask your questions of why do you want to do business in China? I remember the journey beginning 2019, yes, but actually from 18, I'll explain why. First of all, we have something China wants. So before setting up in China, you need to make sure that not just you want China, does China want something from you? Because in the long term, you want to generate business there. So in 2018, we won a global account called Shell. So you can imagine it's massive. So we won the client. They were working with another agency for 20 years, and we won the client in 2018. The first question we asked and challenged by them is like, what's your China solution? How are you going to win China? Because if as an organization and company, if we win China, we win. So that's the first thing they asked us. Second thing, before even setting up in China, before my company in Victoria, 1,000 people there, there's already media, a lot of people talking about our work, talking about our people, talking about us. So obvious there's something that they like and they want from us. And the third thing, before Shell or after Shell, there are a lot of local Chinese clients. They approached us. They're like, we want to work with you. Do you have an office there? Do you have people there? Do you do business in China? So These are the reasons why I say we have something that China wants. The second thing for you to consider is, or for us, is to become the challenger network from 3 different perspectives. One, China is the second biggest and large economy in the world. Its developments basically unstoppable and undeniable. So because of that, if you look at China, the local landscape or ecosystem, if you will, is 10 years ahead of Europe and the West, just to be very honest. So we, VCCP, claim ourselves as the challenger agency for challenger clients and brands, if you will. For being a network, we cannot not have a footprint in China, number one. Number two, learning from the Chinese clients and market and experiences is only going to make us better agency everywhere else. So, for example, the experience we've learned from China now, the US, Prague, Madrid, UK clients asking the same thing. They're like, oh, how are you going to tackle this? How are you going to do that? Now we don't want a big campaign. We want a social campaign. We want this kind of business model. Basically, that's been China doing in the past 15 years. So learning and working with China only is going to boost us, become a better agency everywhere else in the world. So my boss and I, we sat down and say, let's tackle China. However, this is the book before you setting up your company and start doing business in China. My boss, because I know all the content in that book, so I think it's very, very, very valid. My boss basically read this book and then he said, wow, it's very complicated. It's very different. So if I have to highlight one thing for everyone, is China is the largest, the most difficult market a business can enter. Not to scare you away, but just to let you know, China plays by its own rules. It's such a unique country in many ways, not just because it's big, but culturally it's very unique. It's 5,000 years history, 56 ethnic groups, all the religions, cultures different. You drive from one city to the other, they have different cuisine, they have different religious and culture and background and dialect. So it's very complex. So make sure you are mentally prepared for that. Basically, when Christina was presenting, there's so many things I basically want to jump in and just, yes, I agree with you, all of those. So that's why the presentation was long, but it was very generic, because if you go into details, everything is complicated. So be prepared for that. What are the key components on the journey for VCCP? Especially, I think it's basically very long story short version, what Christina just gone through. And CBBC helped us a lot with Launchpad in the beginning. So before you make such a huge commitment to this country and to your business partners, you maybe want to do a little bit like support from CBBC, like Launchpad, to really understand the complexity and the scale that you're entering to. So the first thing I want to say, talent is difficult everywhere, not just in China, everywhere. But in China, specifically difficult because if you are doing global business, which means not only local in China, you also have business here and you actually want to work like this, East goes West, West goes East, you need to, when you find your talent, you need to do your research and talk to them because the business mindset is different. Language barrier, I don't like this word because I don't believe there's a language barrier. If there is, Google Translation can do a job. I think there's a communication barrier, culture barrier. Culture barrier is too deep. We're not going to talk about details today, but communication barrier is very huge. So make sure your talents understand and your employees understand what you are saying. Very good example, the word platform, for example. What you understand platform is different to what Chinese people believe or understand platform. So you think you're talking about the same language, but no. So your expectation, you're going to show me the platform, but she's going to show you something else. So let's be very aware of what kind of talents and what kind of business you're trying to do and choose the right talents for you. And it's difficult. Number two, finance. I mean, Christina did a brilliant job explaining how difficult it is. For us as VCCP, we opened the office in February 2019, so just 1 month before COVID. And since then, I haven't been to China or Hong Kong at all for the obvious reasons. Either my boss as well. We have local employees, never been to the UK as well. And all of these like finance stuff, it's very different system. So you need people professionally in the middle to help you. Trust is the issue because you haven't met a local CFO, for example. How are you going to decide whether you're going to hire somebody right now or get somebody professional, Christina or CBBC to help you? They understand and legally what's the right thing to do. Entering a market, the most important thing like China, you probably want to start something very, very accurate because you don't know the market. Don't try anything tricky because you just don't know what you're getting yourself into. Legal stuff, complicated as well. I'm not going to draw into details because I'm not the most professional and specialist to talk about legals, but I can say it's very difficult, especially when you're dealing with a lot of Chinese partners and clients. That can be very tricky. Every single contract, I'm still dealing with it every single day. Framework contract, small little contract, freelance contract, all those contracts, you need to understand and you need to rely on somebody who understands what the UK is doing as well, because they might be talking about different things. Again, it's all written in English, but different understanding. Admin, all of these things you need. Fapiao, for example, the thing Christina's explained, what Fapiao is, you have to learn this word if you haven't. Because in China, where you do business, all Fapiao here, Fapiao there. Even issuing Fapiao is complicated. It's not like you can do it online. You need to go to the tax office and potentially with Chavo or something like that to get a Fapiao. So that's not easy. And eventually, we're talking about business here, right? So able to do business with your partners or getting companies to work with you, that's not easy, especially your headquarters is not in China and you need your company's portfolio. So that's why all those things have not been easy. However, we are fully operating in Shanghai. So this is the office we have in Shanghai, even though we're really, really small. So just echoing what Christina was saying, choosing the office is one, you need to think about the tax office council and also where your business is the most popular at. For example, I choose Jing'an because Christina mentioned it's not her favorite. I get it. But the reason why we chose this is because of the creative marketing business is focused there. And all of our clients mainly located around the area. And also, especially you want to look very legit, like you're actually part in the center. So this is around the French concession. It's kind of like modern and fancy area. So it brings credibility to the local people and Chinese partners that you are legit and you're committed and you are doing it properly. So after that, it's really interesting since 2019 until now. We've won a lot of, even though I haven't been there for 3 years, we've won a lot of awards in China, like local, not like foreign, local awards. And we're so honored because obviously we're the first agency, foreign agents to win so many awards in a local, in China, it's like they want to be like, or make sure all the Chinese companies that awarded, but surprisingly, we've won the most awards in the Shanghai local international advertising festivals. And then the first year was 1 award. This year it was 6. So it's pretty a good achievement. And we also got invited to all like different festivals to support China as well and all of that. So it only proves that if you're committed to the market and you are doing it really well, you'll be recognized. For example, now a lot of media and PR, they approached me to say, we know you're doing really, really well. So can we do interviews with you? We want to promote you. We want to connect you with different people and all of that. Even government, different cities, they reach out to me like, welcome to our city and please set up your company here and hire local people. That's a different topic. But that only shows that the market is so big. And again, echoing what Christina said, you might have the fear. I still have a little bit of fear if I do business there, but you need to, get on with it. And just if you commit and just do it really, really properly. back to what Christina was saying, is a very interesting point. We also have an office in Singapore. 2 years ago, the first office was set up in Asia. It was Singapore. But Singapore, if you think China is one of your main market to enter, don't bother about Singapore and Hong Kong, because they can never crack China. They can never crack China. So if you think having an office in Hong Kong and Singapore, they can do the business in China and help out, no, very, very different. But they definitely help with Southeast Asia, like APAC. So our Singapore office basically doing all the APAC business, which is really, really good and efficient. But when it comes to China, we have to set up an office there. So the below, these are the current clients that we have, just the key ones I've listed. So they are, some of them, there are like the Western offices that want to enter China, or the other way around. For example, Oppo and Hisense, they're expanding from China to the world. So they want companies, agency like us, kind of meets east west to truly understand them and deliver really good work. So all different types of clients, and they want different things. So my version meant to be short and simple. And then just to echo what Christina's saying, that all the things that she explained to you guys how really matters. Every single question that she mentioned would be something for you to consider. And also, I think I need to give credit to CBBC, because with the first half a year or a year, really, when COVID all started, really Launchpad helped us a lot. It took us, I think, a couple months ago, Christina, right? We finally got a business license registered. Yeah, it's over a year, and bank account, let alone. Yeah, so of course, different considerations why we chose which bank and all of that, but these things take time. One note is China's working like very quick. The pacing is different to the UK. But when it comes to certain things, they're extremely slow. So you need to be prepared for that as well. So that's my section. We can do Q&A together if you guys have questions.
Yeah, so I mean, that is kind of the formal part of today concluded. I mean, I'm sure that there's been a lot of questions that have arisen throughout today. We can either do them, maybe we should just kind of break away and kind of have a bit of a networking chat, because I think it gets very, very specific as Christina mentioned. But Christina, thank you very much. Khan, thank you very much. And thank you all for coming.